They thought they could snatch away my $10 million property just because I bought it for a quarter and assumed I wouldn't have the brains or the guts to defend it. Let me break down this nonsense. I'm a divorced plumber who picked up an abandoned lakefront cabin at a county tax auction. 25 cents. That's all. 1 year later, after pouring sweat and muscle into bringing the place back to life, somehow a tyrant named Delilah Thornfield rolled up in her luxury SUV claiming I had no right to the land. The morning smell of pine from my sawing was still in the air when her designer boots crunched onto my gravel drive. She came waving papers like she'd conquered me already. "This property belongs to the HOA," she announced with that fake polished smile. $10 million, that's what my quarter had grown into. And she really thought she could bully me out of it. What would you do if someone tried to strip you of your home using loopholes and threats? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story goes. But first, let me rewind and explain how a broke tradesman ended up with paradise, and how one vindictive HOA queen nearly wrecked everything. Half a year earlier, I was Marcus Kane, 52, holed up in a Denver apartment that reeked of reheated dinners and failure. Fresh divorce. My ex, Jennifer, made off with half my tools, half my cash, and maybe half my will to keep living. She left me the pickup, probably because it stank of pipe compound and had more rust than paint. Weekends, I prowled tax auctions. People think they're boring. Wrong. The air hums with desperation in those courthouse rooms. The squeak of benches, auctioneers barking like carnival showmen, investors sweating as numbers fly. My dad, a carpenter, taught me to spot potential where most people only see junk. That Tuesday, one listing jumped out. Whispering Pines Cabin, 15 acres, lakefront, minimum bid 25 cents. The photo looked like the set of a horror movie. Caved roof, busted windows. But lakefront in Colorado? That's gold. 2 hours later, I was winding up Highway 285 when Lake Serenity appeared, glittering like a postcard. The cabin sat on the shore, old hand-cut logs, foundation steady as my plumbing levels. Needed everything, plumbing, electric, miracles, but the bones were solid. While I was measuring the place, a spotless Escalade slid up. Out stepped Delilah Thornfield, perfect silver hair, $1,000 hiking boots, clipboard like it was scripture. "Excuse me," she said in that PDA president voice. "I'm president of the Whispering Pines HOA. I waved my tax deed. Marcus Kane, new owner." Her smile iced over. "Oh, sweetie. Tax sales don't override HOA covenants." She pulled out a phone book-thick manual. "This structure violates 17 rules. Demolition required." I explained the cabin predated the HOA by decades, which meant it was legally protected. She gave me that tone rich folks use when explaining why the help is wrong. "We've removed 12 non-compliant properties already. Our lawyer never loses." Standing there, I realized she wasn't just smiling. She was circling like a predator. "Mr. Kane, you don't understand how things work here. This is an exclusive community. People like you usually find it easier to walk away." There it was, the dagger. I wasn't one of them. Blue collar. Wrong background. Wrong everything. She gave me 72 hours to reconsider before hopping back into her climate-controlled fortress. As her SUV disappeared in dust, I clutched that 25-cent receipt, listening to a hawk's cry echo off the mountains. My dad always said bullies only respect pushback. What I didn't know was that this bully had lawyers, money, and a decade of experience steamrolling people like me. The harassment started immediately. Day one of my restoration turned into a circus of petty rules. Monday, a compliance truck arrived. Out stepped Bryce Thornfield, Delilah's kid, pudgy and dead-eyed, maybe 25. HOA compliance officer. He fined me $500 because my truck wasn't parked parallel to the property line. Tuesday, $500 for using a circular saw at 9 a.m. Wednesday, improper waste storage for having debris containers on a construction site. Thursday, landscaping violations because I hadn't planted flowers around a foundation I was still rebuilding. Death by 1,000 citations. Delilah's strategy was simple: bleed me until I gave up. But plumbers solve problems for a living, and I'd wrestled with inspectors before. That weekend, I hit the county records office. After hours of digging, I struck gold. The HOA was only 8 years old. My cabin was built in 1962, which meant I was protected by law. Pre-existing non-conforming use, grandfathered in. Monday morning, I walked into a small-town law office sandwiched between a nail salon and a vape shop. The waiting chairs sagged. The coffee tasted like old pennies, but the paralegal, Zoe Jamie, had sharp eyes. "This is fascinating," she said, scanning my deed. "They don't have authority over your property." She filed a motion right then. Suddenly, Delilah's citations were just scrap paper. But I wasn't only fighting in court. That night, I started the Cabin Restoration Chronicles online. First video, a time-lapse of me hauling out decades of rot set to classic rock. Watching the cabin's beauty reemerge was like time travel in reverse. The comments exploded. "Stick it to the HOA. This place is going to be gorgeous." Karen from Canada checking in, Team Marcus all the way. Comments like that kept pouring in. Even Pete Rodriguez, who owned the local hardware store, started giving me discounts after watching the videos. "That woman's been terrorizing folks around here for years," he muttered while loading lumber into my truck. About time someone stood up to her. The town split exactly how you'd expect. Half the neighbors quietly rooted for me, slipping encouragement under my windshield when nobody was watching. The other half suddenly discovered their flower beds every time I waved. Delilah's shadow ran deep. Then, Wednesday night, everything shifted. A folded note appeared under my wiper blade. "She's done this before. Check the Kellerman property on Maple Ridge Road." Thursday morning, I drove 20 minutes out to a sleepy subdivision. The address led to nothing but a vacant lot. Cracked foundations, weeds pushing through concrete, a faded for sale sign that looked older than my divorce. Whatever happened to the Kellermans, it wasn't good. My first viral hit dropped Friday. I uploaded footage of me pressure washing the cabin's log walls. Years of grime melted away, revealing beautiful craftsmanship. In 6 hours, the video hit 50,000 views and got shared across DIY channels nationwide. That evening, I filmed my update on the restored porch as the mountains glowed gold in the fading light, loons calling across the water. Day 7, I told the camera, "Delilah thinks fines and paperwork will break me. But every citation just proves I'm making progress." Tomorrow we start on electrical. This cabin isn't just getting restored, it's being reborn. What I didn't know was that Delilah was watching too. And my growing online army was making her furious. Monday morning of week 2, trouble pulled up in an official truck. County Building Inspector Harold Fleming shuffled out, looking like he hated his job as much as I hated seeing him. He slapped a bright orange stop work order on my door. "All electrical requires permits," he mumbled. "None on file." I stared at him. "I filed 3 weeks ago." Fleming half-heartedly tapped at his tablet. "Nothing here, $10,000 per day fine until compliance. 10 grand daily for work I was legally qualified to do, on property I legally owned. Like getting fined for breathing." That afternoon, Clerk Janet at the county office pecked at her keyboard with all the speed of a tranquilized turtle. 20 minutes later, she squinted at the screen. "Well, that's odd. Your applications were filed. They've just been misfiled in a miscellaneous folder. Strange coincidence. Almost as strange as Fleming golfing every Thursday at Pine Ridge Country Club, with none other than Delilah Thornfield." Their member spotlight posts on Facebook gave that one away. Conflict of interest, anyone? Meanwhile, the Kellerman mystery came to life. I tracked down Robert Kellerman in a tackle shop in Durango, buying lures with the dazed look of someone who'd been through suburban warfare. "Delilah Thornfield," he spat, his laugh bitter enough to curdle milk. "She's a vulture." Hit us with 2 years of citations, fines, mysterious permit delays. Designed to bleed us dry until we sold. Here's the kicker. Her husband ran Thornfield Construction. After families like the Kellermans were forced out, guess which company swooped in and bought the land for pennies? Robert shook his head, hands trembling over a spool of fishing line. "My place went for 60 grand just to cover legal fees." 6 months later, Thornfield Construction flipped it for 300,000. Back at the cabin, Zoe studied Harold Fleming's stop work order like it was a crime scene. "He never disclosed his relationship with HOA leadership," she said. "That's textbook conflict of interest." She filed an ethics complaint so fast it made my head spin. Within 48 hours, the stop work order was suspended. Turns out golf buddies don't make solid legal witnesses. Meanwhile, my social media exploded. The electrical installation series drew in electricians nationwide, many sharing their own horror stories with permit offices. My Day 14 update went up while I stood in the half-finished kitchen, golden light streaming through new windows, sawdust motes floating like fireflies. They're trying to bury progress in paperwork, I told the camera. But here's what real progress looks like. I showed off the new breaker panel, explaining how modern systems prevent house fires. The video blew up, 200,000 views in a day. My follower count passed 6 figures. Pete from the hardware store introduced me to Harold Whitmore, a retired judge with eyes sharp as nails and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. He read through my paperwork line by line, adjusting his glasses. "This inspector's filings are sloppy," he muttered. "And this pattern from the HOA? Classic property manipulation scheme." Harold Whitmore stepped in with free legal advice and immediately spotted enough violations to shred Delilah's campaign. But the real turning point came when local news reporter Sarah Martinez called. "I've been following your restoration story," she said, her voice edged with the sharp curiosity only real journalists carry. 30 minutes later, she had enough material for a 3-part expose on Delilah's harassment scheme. Other residents had whispered complaints for years, but no one had documented things the way my daily videos did. That weekend, I launched a GoFundMe, help save the 25 cents cabin. Donations poured in. $25,000 in a week, enough to fund the fight without living on ramen noodles forever. Sunday evening, I sat on my new front steps watching the mountains turn purple and gold at sunset. Loons called across the lake, waves lapped gently at the dock, and the air smelled of pine sap and clean water. As I checked the donation totals, headlights rolled up my drive. Delilah's Escalade. Even in the fading light, her silhouette radiated fury. She didn't step out, she erupted. Perfume clashing with desperation, clutching a manila envelope thick enough to stop a bullet. "Mr. Kane," she declared with the drama of a soap opera villain, "you are being served for fraud." She shoved the envelope at me like it was toxic waste. Inside, a dense formal complaint accusing me of tricking the court, claiming I knew about HOA restrictions all along. "Criminal investigation starts Monday," she purred, her Botoxed smile stretched tight. "Fraud carries prison time. Asset forfeiture. Everything you've built here, gone." Tuesday morning, Sheriff Rodriguez, a decent man who looked miserable delivering the papers, handed me notice of a criminal investigation. Suddenly, I was facing potential 20-year federal charges. The media turned on me overnight. Cabin con man headlines sprouted everywhere. My once supportive comment sections became cesspools of fraud accusations. Professionally designed flyers plastered town, painting me as a scammer. My plumbing business was bombed with fake reviews, cancellations poured in, and 2 decades of reputation went up in smoke in less than 48 hours. It even reached Jennifer, my ex-wife, who called me sobbing after reporters hounded her with questions about whether I'd been a con artist during our marriage. "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" she cried. Delilah's smear campaign was working. My GoFundMe donations flatlined. One week I was the underdog hero, the next I was branded a criminal. But while she waged her war of slander, Harold Whitmore quietly dismantled her entire legal foundation. He discovered the Whispering Pines HOA had never been properly incorporated with the state. "This is remarkable," he said, spreading the papers across his desk. "Legally, the HOA doesn't even exist. My grandfather used to talk about fake authority, people who act like they have power but don't. Lawyers call it ultra vires, authority that doesn't actually exist," which meant every fine, every threat, every lawsuit Delilah issued was nothing more than worthless paper. Then Harold dug deeper. County records showed the original 1980s development survey, done by Delilah's own father, specifically excluded my cabin's parcel. She had known all along that the HOA had zero jurisdiction over my land. Her entire crusade was smoke and mirrors, built on intimidation and lies. Friday, vindication arrived. The district attorney announced the fraud investigation was baseless. No evidence. Dismissed with prejudice. Harold's documentation proved my tax sale was completely legitimate. Meanwhile, my online support exploded. 500,000 followers now watch this David versus Goliath battle play out. #Cabin Justice trended nationwide. Local shops hung "We Support Marcus" signs in their windows. County officials announced a review of every HOA citation from the past decade. Former victims came forward with their own horror stories, burying Delilah's credibility under a mountain of evidence. That weekend, A professional appraiser spent 2 hours walking the property. His verdict, my fully restored lakefront cabin, was worth $2.8 million. Not bad for something I'd bought for 25 cents. Sunday evening, I stood on my dock, sunset painting the peaks crimson and gold, the lake reflecting everything like glass. The air was sharp with pine and smoke from distant cabins. An owl hooted in the distance as my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Martinez. Big story breaking tomorrow. You'll want to see this. She wasn't exaggerating. The next morning, while cleaning out the musty basement, my crowbar hit something hidden behind a wall panel. A rusted metal box. Inside, the original 1962 deed, hand-drawn surveyor maps, and a folder marked Mineral Rights Assessment. My hand shook as I read it. A 1980s geological survey estimated deposits of lithium, copper, and even traces of gold beneath my land, valued between $8 and $12 million. Suddenly, everything clicked. Harold froze mid-sip of coffee when I spread the papers across his desk. "Good God, Marcus," he said. "This changes everything. Those mineral rights transferred with your tax deed. You own all of it. In America, unless stated otherwise, buying land gives you everything from the sky above to the earth below." My 25-cent cabin came with an underground fortune. Sarah's investigation detonated like a bomb across the airwaves. Delilah's husband's construction company had quietly filed bankruptcy 6 months earlier, drowning in debt. They desperately needed a windfall. Delilah had known about the mineral deposits for years. Her father's files contained the old survey. Her harassment campaign had nothing to do with HOA rules. It was about greed. She had been sitting on the information like buried treasure, waiting for the chance to snatch it. And now the world knew the truth. Delilah's harassment had officially crossed into criminal territory. Harold explained it in plain English. She tried stealing a winning lottery ticket by convincing you it was a worthless scratch-off. Federal racketeering charges now loomed on the horizon. That night, I sat on the dock watching the sun bleed amber and gold across the lake. A mining company had already called $8 million cash, no questions asked, for immediate extraction rights. That kind of money could erase debt for 3 generations of my family. I could walk away filthy rich and leave this wilderness to be gutted into a scarred moonscape. But the lake's mirror surface reflected more than mountains. It reflected the peace I'd found here. Every plank I'd replaced, every log I'd restored had stripped stress from my shoulders. This place wasn't just valuable, it was alive. So I made the choice no one expected. Instead of selling, I announced plans for limited, sustainable extraction, just enough to fund a conservation trust. 90% of the land would be preserved forever, with ecotourism cabins creating long-term revenue for the community. The reaction? Nuclear. Social media lit up with praise. Environmental groups hailed it as a model for the future. Tourism boards projected over 100,000 visitors a year. Overnight, I wasn't just a plumber with a cabin. I was a man with a $10 million fortune choosing community over greed. Delilah had been clawing for Fort Knox, and the vault door was about to slam shut on her hand. By Tuesday, Harold's office looked like a command center. Maps covered every wall, legal briefs stacked like artillery, and volunteers filled the room with energy that smelled of coffee and righteous fury. Harold's eyes gleamed as he adjusted his glasses. "We're filing a civil RICO suit," he said. Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the same law they used to take down the mob. Sarah Martinez filmed the strategy session for her growing series, capturing Harold explaining how Delilah's years of harassment fit a textbook pattern of racketeering. She hadn't been enforcing rules, she'd been running a criminal enterprise behind the mask of community leadership. Reinforcements arrived. Rebecca Torres, an environmental attorney with a mane of silver streak hair and negotiation skills sharp as barbed wire, joined pro bono. She laid out geological surveys across the table. "We can fund the park forever," she explained. "Extract a tiny fraction of the deposits, place the rest in a conservation trust, and make the land untouchable." Meanwhile, local contractor Miguel Santos rallied the trades. Plumbers, electricians, and carpenters volunteered their weekends to build trails, cabins, and infrastructure, brothers and sisters of calloused hands backing with their own. The legal strategy was brutal in its elegance. Seek triple damages under RICO, 3 times actual losses. That meant Delilah faced potential penalties topping $30 million. Harold also filed criminal referrals with the FBI for mail fraud and extortion. And behind the scenes, my accountant, Lisa Jamie, a quiet genius who could make spreadsheets sing, structure the new nonprofit, the 25 Cents Conservation Trust. It would oversee the extraction, fund park operations, and educate people about property rights and defending themselves against predatory HOAs. Lisa clicked through projections on her laptop, her voice calm but glowing with excitement. 50 permanent jobs, 5 million annually in tourism revenue, plus a perpetual endowment for land protection. What unfolded around the lake was nothing short of a renaissance. Every weekend, volunteers arrived in droves, retired contractors teaching apprentices, families bringing picnic lunches and then picking up hammers. The air rang with saws, laughter, and the sense that we were building more than a park. We were reclaiming a community. Local businesses donated materials at cost. Pete Rodriguez's hardware store became Mission Control, its bulletin board covered in schedules and progress photos. Sarah's reporting unearthed 12 more families Delilah had targeted, homes stripped away through harassment. In response, we created a victim support fund, offering legal aid to anyone seeking restitution. Online, the story exploded. My following soared past 1.2 million. Daily updates blended construction progress with plain-spoken lessons on property rights, what HOAs can and can't do, warning signs of harassment campaigns, and how to fight back. Inside the renovated cabin, we began shaping an education center. Displays would teach visitors about mineral rights, conservation easements, and legal self-defense. Rebecca Torres, working her environmental magic, secured university partnerships so the preserve could double as a living laboratory for sustainable extraction and habitat restoration. National media picked up the story. News networks requested interviews. Filmmakers circled, smelling a documentary. What began as one man fixing a rundown cabin had become a national symbol, ordinary people standing up to corrupt authority. Meanwhile, Delilah's world was imploding. County officials launched sweeping reviews of all HOA activity from the past decade. Her phantom association had never been legally valid, making every fine and citation actionable fraud. Lawsuits piled high. Her empire wasn't cracking, it was disintegrating. Friday evening, I stood inside the nearly finished visitor center. Golden light poured across polished hardwood floors, pine-scented air drifting through open doors. Miguel appeared, helmet pushed back, smile easy. Marcus, we're ahead of schedule. Opening ceremony next weekend. Outside, families explored new trails and boardwalks. Children's laughter carried across Lake Serenity as loons called under a sunset painted in purples and gold. But Delilah wasn't finished. Not yet. Like a child smashing a toy she couldn't have, she turned to sabotage. Tuesday morning, the smell of diesel and betrayal hit me as I walked onto the site. Equipment sat ruined, sugar in fuel tanks, tires slashed, hydraulic lines cut with surgical precision. Miguel studied the damage, his jaw tight. This wasn't kids. Whoever did this knew exactly what to hit. The threats escalated. Notes tucked under my wiper read, "Accidents happen on construction sites. Smart people quit while they're ahead." Volunteers started getting late-night calls, breathing, vague warnings. Pete's hardware store windows were smeared with profanity. Miguel's truck was keyed with "Go home." Insurance companies bailed, citing terrorism risk. But our cameras had caught the prize. Bryce Thornfield, Delilah's Dowie nephew, creeping around at 2 a.m. His reflective vest glowed like a neon sign in the infrared footage as he fumbled with sabotage, more bumbling burglar than criminal mastermind. While Delilah played Vandal Queen, Jerry Kowalski, my PI, a rumpled ex-cop who ran on gas station coffee, was unraveling her finances. He spread records across my kitchen table, the smell of old paper mixing with burnt Java. "Your HOA queen is hemorrhaging," Jerry said. Her husband owed $2.3 million. Foreclosures loomed. She'd been embezzling HOA funds to cover mounting legal bills, robbing Peter to sue Paul, as my grandmother would have said. The irony was beautiful. The very campaign meant to break me was bleeding her dry. Lawyers, crisis managers hired saboteurs. It was costing Delilah far more than she could afford. And Jerry had uncovered the master plan. Delilah's scheme was simple and ruthless: systematically target vulnerable property owners, then use my cabin as her golden parachute to escape bankruptcy. My 25-cent purchase had accidentally detonated her retirement plan. The FBI took notice. Agent Rebecca Foster, a sharp-eyed professional who spoke in measured tones and missed nothing, Sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours, recording every detail of my documentation. Patterns like this rarely stop at one victim, she explained, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had dismantled white-collar empires before. Your evidence probably prevented dozens of future targets. Meanwhile, the community rallied like villagers facing a dragon. Businesses formed protective alliances. Volunteers patrolled construction sites around the clock. Crowd-funded legal defense soared past $150,000. National HOA reform groups joined our fight, recognizing the case's precedent-setting potential. Delilah fought back with expensive crisis managers, spinning narratives about outside agitators, destroying community values. She leaned on elderly neighbors, threatening higher fees to bankroll her lawsuits. She tried painting me as the villain, claiming my park would crash property values, poison lakes, and invite crime. But every lie backfired, exposing her corruption further. Online, my following surged past 800,000. Hashtag Cabin Justice trended nationally. People shared their own HOA horror stories, fueling a grassroots movement demanding accountability for suburban tyrants everywhere. Sarah Martinez's investigative series won awards, and other journalists picked up the thread, uncovering copycat scams nationwide. Sunday evening, I stood on my dock, watching Lake Serenity glow molten gold under storm-tinged skies. My phone buzzed. Indictment sealed. Arrest scheduled Wednesday morning. You'll want front row seats. Agent Foster's text made my chest tighten. After months of harassment, vandalism, and intimidation, Delilah Thornfield was finally about to face justice. But she wasn't going down without a final act of desperation. Tuesday night, she showed up at my cabin in a modest Honda, dressed down in khakis and a cardigan, her designer armor replaced with relatable neighbor cosplay. Even her hair looked intentionally imperfect. Marcus, she began, voice dripping with manufacturer humility. I think we've both made mistakes. Maybe we can work something out. She set a briefcase on my table and clicked it open. Inside, neat stacks of $100 bills. The smell of old money mixed with her nervous sweat. $500,000 cash she offered. No lawyers, no hassles. You take this, I drop everything. I let her finish, recording the entire performance on my phone as she dug herself into a bribery charge. When I refused, her smile cracked like cheap paint. $1 million, she whispered. And I'll print a public apology. Please, Marcus, I'm begging you. The woman who'd once sneered people like you was now pleading with a plumber she tried to crush. The irony tasted sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie. But her desperation only grew uglier. Wednesday morning, a troop of professional protesters showed up at the site, waving printed signs about protecting mountain wildlife. These weren't environmentalists. They were paid actors from Denver, $200 a day to manufacture outrage. Their chains were so flimsy a terrier could have snapped them. Sheriff Rodriguez shook his head. Ma'am, you're protesting a conservation project. That's like picketing a puppy rescue. The circus made for bad press, but worse was yet to come. Bots swarmed my social media. Fake death threats. Spam campaigns. Then came the attack that crossed the line. Someone dumped industrial paint across the cabin's restored exterior, bright orange sludge that burned our eyes and required hazmat crews to clean. That afternoon, Agent Foster returned with a full FBI forensics team. Watching federal agents dust my porch for prints felt surreal, like I'd wandered into an episode of Dateline starring a plumber with a 25-cent deed. Foster surveyed the damage with cool detachment. This escalation tells me someone knows their arrest is imminent, she said, snapping photos. Desperate people make desperate choices. This is a powerhouse finale. You blended courtroom drama, social justice, community uplift, and even a modern YouTube-style sign-off. It reads like a saga that began with a petty HOA feud and escalated into a national movement.